that conduct impulses between gyri in the same hemisphere. So for instance, these types of tracks that extend between gyri within the same hemisphere, these would be association tracks. If we go back here and talk about the track that might connect the primary auditory cortex with Wernicke's area, that would be an association track. Whereas another type of track is a commissural track. These conduct impulses from gyri in one hemisphere to the corresponding gyrus in the contralateral hemisphere. So think of the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is going to carry commissural tracks, traveling from one hemisphere to the next. And then finally, a third type of track is a projection track, which conducts impulses from the cerebral cortex down to lower centers of the central nervous system, like the brainstem or spinal cord. Projection tracks also work vice versa. They carry information from the spinal cord up toward the cortex. So projection tracks kind of go from high to low or low to high. So as an example, the internal capsules that are lateral to the right and left thalamus, they would carry projection tracks. And that's depicted here. Here's the internal capsules. Notice that they're sandwiched between the thalamus and the basal nuclei. Whereas these are commissural tracks that are traveling from one hemisphere to another. Finally, we get to the concept of basal nuclei. Now, the old term for basal nuclei is basal ganglia. And unfortunately, you'll hear basal ganglia more than you'll hear basal nuclei. I say unfortunately because the term is a misnomer. It's actually incorrect. By our definitions, a ganglion is a cluster of nerve cell bodies within the peripheral nervous system. So it's really an inappropriate term. The better term is basal nuclei.
So just scratch out ganglia?
Well, if you hear it, I want you to realize that, in fact, it's a misnomer, but understand where it's located. The basal ganglia, or nuclei, are located deep within the white matter. Okay? They play a role in motor control, particularly in starting and stopping movements initiated within the primary motor cortex. And so they modulate that movement. They not only control the starting and the stopping, but they allow us to move smoothly. So for instance, if I wanted to pick up this pen, if it weren't for the basal nuclei, I might just do this and drop it in my pocket. Okay? But as a result of activity from the basal nuclei, I can apply just the amount of tension I need to pick it up, move it smoothly to my pocket, and slow down as I'm approaching, and then just kind of safely drop it into the pocket like that. Yeah, I'm good that way. Okay? But that depends upon the basal nuclei. So starting, stopping, modulating. Let's go back.
I just cracked my
I'll
head.
show this here. This shows in pink the major basal nuclei. This one next to the lateral ventricle is called the caudate nucleus. And then lateral to the internal capsule, you have the putamen and globus pallidus. Now, my personal mnemonic for remembering the basal nuclei is this. Cannot put glue on a pig. Cannot put glue on a pig. Did you follow that?
Sure.
Cannot stands for caudate nucleus. Put, putamen. Glue on a pig is globus pallidus. No, no. No mnemonic is perfect. Many movement disorders have their basis within the basal nuclei. There's some type of damage or degeneration of neurons within the basal nuclei. The classic example of a disorder affecting the basal nuclei is Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease represents degeneration of dopamine-secreting neurons. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that they secrete within the basal nuclei. Dopamine is very important in terms of movement. In fact, within the basal nuclei, there's a balance between two different neurotransmitters, dopamine and acetylcholine. And as long as they're in balance, it provides for smooth movement. If there is an excess of one or another, then it can disrupt that balance. And in the case of Parkinson's, it can result in slowness of movement, what's called either bradykinesia or akinesia. So bradykinesia or akinesia. For example, if someone has severe Parkinson's and they're sitting in a chair and you ask them to stand up, they can't just stand up like I'm doing, okay? They're going to have difficulty initiating that movement. And then when they finally stand up, they're going to assume kind of a stoop posture, like this. If you ask them to walk to one side of the room, they're going to have difficulty initiating gait. So they're going to... And when they do walk, it's going to be kind of a slow shuffling gait, almost a magnetic gait, where they have difficulty picking their feet off the ground. And then they're going to exhibit some postural instability and difficulty stopping. So that when they finally do get going, and you ask them to turn, they can't just flip around quickly. Watch, for instance, my gait as a point of contrast here. Now, I've been working on this all my life, so. But I've kind of developed kind of a stylish gait like this. You ask me to turn, I'm going to kind of do this without difficulty. I don't even think about it. Okay, whereas people with Parkinson's, if you ask them to turn, they're going to do what's called turning and block, where it takes them a long time to kind of like this. It takes them a long time. And with their gait, there's a loss of arm swing. I think I showed you that when I walk, I like to do this. And most of us do. But someone with Parkinson's, when they walk, you see very little arm swing. And I mentioned postural instability. In fact, that's one of the features. They can kind of lose balance quickly. Another feature is a resting tremor. And it's not a fine tremor like you might see like this.
My uncle has that.
It's a coarse tremor like this, like you see in Muhammad Ali when he was holding the flag for the Olympics. Some people call it a pill rolling tremor because it looks like they're rolling a pill between the thumb and index finger like this. One way to test early Parkinson's is to test for postural instability. So, who wants to volunteer here?
Oh, I think I've seen that.
Can I have a volunteer? Just anybody. All right, you two, if you don't mind. Come up here.
My posture is already unstable.
Okay,
I'll fall
now,
on my face.
let's suppose that Emily is the patient that we're testing, okay, and Sarah, you're my office assistant.
Okay.
So what I want you to do is just stand in front of Emily right here.
Trustful?
Okay? Right in front of her. Okay? Okay. Now, to test for Parkinson's, specifically for postural instability, I want you to look at her closely. Look the other way.
They're having a moment.
Okay, now, notice that when I pushed her, she righted herself quickly. Okay? So that's good. That would kind of go against the diagnosis of Parkinson's, because if she had it, what would happen to her? She would tend to fall. And what's the role here of Sarah? Just to catch her, right. Right. Okay? So that's one way to assess for Parkinson's. Now, with Parkinson's, it's a resting tremor. So if you ask them to do something with their extremity, like for instance, take your finger and touch your nose and touch my finger. With movement, the tremor tends to go away. But when they assume the resting position again, the tremor comes right back. or if you subject them to stress. Like I might have you do some serial subtractions and say, start with 100 and subtract 7.
93.
Keep going.
I
Right,
really.
see, well, that type of that
You
type
had
of stress would-
Parkinson's.
If you look at the hands, that type of stress would bring on the tremor, would make it worse. Okay? So again, basal nuclei. Thank you. Now, I'll give you an example of another type of movement disorder that has its basis in the degeneration of neurons within the basal nuclei. It's called Huntington's chorea. Have y'all ever heard of Huntington's disease or Huntington's chorea?
Yes.
I've heard, I don't know.
Instead of having akinesia or bradykinesia, people with Huntington's have hyperkinesia. Oftentimes uncontrolled movement. So that they'll be talking to you and they'll be doing this. You know what I'm saying, Jordan?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to look at them and they'll have twisting movements of the face. It's hard to talk to them because you feel a little bit uneasy.
My mom gets mad because I do that when I talk to people. Not that badly, but I mean, I don't.
The
Words.
problem with Huntington's is that the clinical symptoms don't begin until around age 40. If a parent has Huntington's, there's a 50% chance that the offspring of that patient is going to have Huntington's, but they won't know it unless they get tested. They have to go to genetic testing. And so that's always a watershed moment in that person's life, is whether they're going to get tested or not. Because if it tests positive, it's almost like a death sentence. You know, you realize that you're going to end up being that person, where at some point you're going to need to be institutionalized. You're going to need to be under someone else's care. You won't be able to control your own body.
They pronounced my uncle's Parkinson's very early.
How old was he? Like Huntington's, it usually doesn't begin until 40 or so.
He was probably in his 50s, but like, I think he went in for something else. Like, he's a police officer, so I think he was like, or he was a police officer, whatever. But I think he went to the doctor for something else, and then something led them to like test for that, so he didn't really, like, everyone didn't think that it was like a correct diagnosis at first because he didn't really have anything serious, but now you can
But
tell.
with time, it will declare itself.
Yeah, I know. He has tremors, and like when you talk to him, you can know something's wrong, but he still can like verbalize.
The tremors aren't necessarily just confined to the upper extremities. They can be, you can have kind of a tremor in the jaw, where you see the jaw, or you can hear it in the voice. You can see head bobbing. But people, while we say that Parkinson's usually doesn't, the symptoms don't appear until after 40, there are people who do get it earlier, like Michael J. Fox. You know who he is?
Yeah.
He just had a show that like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bomb. Yes.
He did.
But early on, he had some good shows. He had a
What
TV
was
show
it?
early on where he
I can't
played
remember what it
this
was called.
character, Alex Keaton. Are y'all familiar with that sitcom?
No.
No.
He was in- So y'all are more familiar with the movies he did, the Back to the Future things.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe.
He was
All right.
on The Good Life, and they like used his Parkinson's to act his character.
Oh, right. I think I saw that. You're right.
Did he have the Parkinson's?
Oh, he does.
Why? No, I mean, while they were filming Back to the Future.
You know, I think he did.
Or, like,
I
did
know
he have any
that with the
tremors or
TV
anything?
show, I heard in his interviews that he was starting to have manifestations while he was still doing the sitcom, but he would hide it. You know, that's what a lot of people do. That's a natural response. You know,
It's easy if someone's not looking for it.
and with early onset, it's easy to kind of hide. But as the
Once it gets
symptoms,
more developed.
but yeah, then you can't hide it. All right. So we talked about the cerebral hemispheres. Let's move on to the diencephalon. The thalamus is made up of thalamic nuclei. These are different foci of gray matter containing clusters of nerve cell bodies. The right and left thalamus are connected by what's called an intermediate mass. So if I were to draw the brain here in frontal section, and the thalamus is going to sit along the medial aspect of each lobe. And let's draw in section here through the, this is going to be one lateral ventricle, here's going to be the other lateral ventricle like this. And let's say here's the third ventricle coming down between the right lymphalamus. Okay? Well, the intermediate mass is going to connect the two thalamus. It's going to pass through the third ventricle like this. Okay? So that would be the thalamus on the medialmost aspect of each hemisphere. The thalamus acts as a relay station for sensory information. Let me show you this. Let's see.
So when they separate the right and left hemispheres of the brain, do they leave anything connected, or is it a literal like separation of everything?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that surgery.
We were just talking about that in psychology.
Yeah. I know there have been a lot of experimental studies where they cut the corpus callosum, but I'm not as familiar with those studies.
Okay.
All right, so let's suppose here you have your midbrain, your pons, your medulla oblongata, and your spinal cord down here. Way over here, I'm going to draw your finger here. Let's say you're touching something sharp. Okay. You're going to have a primary neuron associated with a sensory nerve ending, a sensory receptor here. And the primary neuron is going to be, remember, a unipolar neuron. And that unipolar neuron is going to travel all the way back to the spinal cord, where it's going to synapse with a secondary sensory neuron. Okay. Now, what's happening here, by the way, is simply this, is that in this segment of the spinal cord, remember you have a dorsal root with the dorsal root ganglion. Did you talk about that?
Yes, we did.
Okay. So what's happening is this axon is coming in like this. The primary neuron, its cell body is located here in the dorsal root ganglion. And it's going to synapse here within the posterior gray horn here.